Well, this story begins with a wee babe, just a few weeks old, who had whooping cough and managed, against all odds, to survive. That was unusual in those days. She was born in August of 1932. Charles Dwight and Florence Jamison McDonald, and she was named Dorothy Eileen McDonald, younger sister of Dwight Jamison McDonald, who was called Jim. Actually, we lived in Freedom, Pennsylvania at that time, and until I was almost 5 years old. My father, at that time, was the superintendent of schools in Freedom and lost his job because somebody's relative needed a job. Freedom is a town along the Ohio River north of Pittsburgh, a few miles. The mountains in western Pennsylvania are green, but they can also be very steep. And Freedom kind of clings to the side of the mountain, and as I remember, it was the houses. If you go along the street, the houses on the downside of the street, when you go in, if you want to go out the back door, you have to go down to the cellar and out the back door, and the backyard keeps on going down from there. On the other side of the street, the houses are about 50 steps up, and if you want to go out the back door, you have to go up to the second floor. And so it's really steep. There's a level area between the town and the river, and it was at that time full of railroad tracks, and there was a roundhouse there. Now, a roundhouse is a place where they turn the engines around so that they can take the trains either north or south. But in those days, they were all steam engines, and they burned dirty coal. And so the town was just covered with smoky soot and black coal tar. My mother hated it. I really didn't notice because I was just little and enjoying my life. Most of the things from that part of my life were things that I have been told, but one thing that I do remember is being on the river in a boat that had a paddle wheel, and it was a wonderful experience for a little girl. Things that I've been told, for example, are things like how, as a little girl, I embarrassed my parents a little bit when in church I got up in church and put a foot up and shouted out, look at my new shoes." So it was a time of happy childhood for me, but a challenge for my parents. So we left Freedom when I was about not quite 5 years old and went back to Ohio, where my dad had grown up. And he became the principal of the grade school in New Concord, Ohio. So that summer when we left Freedom to move to Ohio, my dad became a principal of the grade school there. I think it really was a very, very happy move. We spent the summer, we packed up and we headed for California. And in those days, there were no interstate highways. There were just little 2-lane roads that meandered from town to town. And so that's what we did. We set out and we meandered from town to town. I remember we visited places in Arizona and saw the petrified forest, and we headed out through the Rocky Mountains. And again, there were no highways. There were just little roads. And in fact, going through the mountains, there were times when the road got so narrow that if two cars going different directions met, they couldn't pass. And so one car would have to back up far enough to find a spot where it was wide enough for them to pass each other. So that was a real adventure, and when we came back from California, we were all ready to settle in our new home in New Concord, Ohio. Now, New Concord is a very small town, and it has a small college. It's a really nice little place. The people there at that time were mostly Scots-Irish, and I remember there were 4 churches in town. There was a Presbyterian church, there was a United Presbyterian church, there was a Reformed Presbyterian church, and then there were the Methodists. We went to the Presbyterian church. It was up on a little hill, and it was an old white church, lovely, small, and special. The things that I really loved about that church were Sunday school class with Mrs. Miller, and our singing time with Janie Trace. Janie was full of music, and she'd get us into a little room that was on the side of the church, and she could get us just shouting our lungs out. We just loved singing for Janie. My parents taught us when we were very little that we paid tithing. And so in the Presbyterian church there, they had special little envelopes that you could put your tithing in. And I remember that there were two sides to it. I don't remember why there were 2, but anyway, I put my pennies in, and then on Sunday, I could put the envelope in when they passed the tray for the offerings, the offering tray. Also remember that there was a man named Max Good. He would come to town, I think probably every year or so, and put on revival meetings in our church. Boy, he packed the house. And at the end of every one of his meetings, he would have everybody all worked up, and then he'd have have them stand up and come up to the front to commit themselves to Jesus. Well, I was, I don't know, 8 years old, somewhere in there. And one time I decided that I would get up and go up to the front. And so that's what I did. When I got there, my dad came up to me and he said, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Well, I'm stubborn, and so if I wasn't sure before that, yeah, I decided that's what I wanted to do. New Concord has sort of 3 claims to fame that I knew about. First, there's a cabin on Main Street that William Rainey Harper lived in. You've probably never heard of him, but he was an early president of the University of Chicago, and so that log cabin is still there, right across from the entrance to the college. Second claim to fame would be Agnes Moorehead. She was a character actress in movies and television. Actually, the last thing I remember seeing her in was a TV series called Bewitched. And then the third is John Glenn, who was the astronaut and senator from Ohio. And the college gymnasium has been named now for him, and the local high school is named for him. While living in New Concord, I remember particularly one beautiful evening. Well, that day I had gotten a new swimming suit, and so I was wearing it, and the kids in our neighborhood were all out playing, having a good time, when some of the older boys said, "Hey, you want to go snipe hunting?" Oh boy. So we all lined up and followed them through the empty lots and along the creek and through the alleys, and we had a wonderful time. It was just so fun. And then finally we were coming along one of the alleys and went into somebody's yard, and we were heading back toward the street that we lived on to go home, and all of a sudden there was a big dog who ran out from behind a barn and started barking at us like crazy. Well, we all started to run, and the dog ran along with us barking, and I was probably one of the smaller kids. There were some other ones behind me, but as we ran like crazy, and this dog started up. Well, there I was with my swimming suit, my little white bare legs, and he came roaring along, and he liked the looks of those little white legs, and he just grabbed my leg, bit a big chunk out of it, and it was kind of sad, because that poor dog they put him down, and for me, I spent 2 or 3 weeks having to stay in bed because they wouldn't let me walk on that leg that had that big chunk taken out of it. I still have a scar from that. Was not one of my better summers. I've really never been tempted to go snipe hunting again. Basketball was a big thing in our town, and when I was about in the 6th grade, we had a really, really good basketball team. The high school had a really, really good basketball team that went all the way to the state championship. And so we were all excited about it. And our school, our little grade school, was on Main Street and had a great big playground behind it. And across from the playground was the high school. And so we could get to the high school without any problems at all. And on days when there was a basketball game that year, we would all run over to the high school with our dimes and line up to get in to watch the game. Well, the one I really remember is I was a little bit later than everybody else, and I ran in, and my friend said, come, you get in line with us, and here we have an extra ticket that you can have. So, boy, how wonderful. That made me really happy. So that's exactly what I did. And there was a problem. The problem was that the reason they had an extra ticket was that somebody had gone into the game and hadn't given their ticket to the person at the door, and then they found a seat, and then they went back out again, and they gave them another ticket, so they had 2 tickets. And so that was the ticket that they gave me. Well, everything, seemed, I don't know whether I realized that or not, but pretty soon my dad came along, and he seemed to know something about what was happening, and he said, "Where'd you get that ticket?" And I looked at my toes, and I said, whatever I needed to say, but finally I had to tell him where it had come from. And so immediately we were walking down the hallway to the high school principal's office. And I spent a few minutes, it seemed like hours, in the high school principal's office, being sorry and tearful. And finally, when I was released, went back and I paid my dime for a ticket and went to watch the game. A lesson, yes, a lesson about doing things the right way. When I was in grade school, the college, sometime along the way, got a new band director, and he decided that the high school should have a band as well. And he managed to convince whoever needed to be convinced that he should be hired to start a band in the high school. But this was a really small town, and what they were doing was getting a marching band, and so he just didn't have enough kids. He didn't have enough kids from the high school, added the junior high. That didn't do it. And so he came to our school. And so in the 4th grade, I joined the high school band. Oh, it was really a sad thing. I think anybody who might have watched would say that it was pretty disastrous. Nobody practiced. We'd go to band practice every week, and when band practice was over, everybody'd take their instruments and pile them in the corner, not to be thought about again until the next band practice. What we played were all the Sousa marches, and we loved that, but we didn't love it enough to think that we should practice and do any better than we were doing. However, we managed. We did march at some of the football games. And I think the town enjoyed having a band just to march on Memorial Day. Well, the time came that the band director decided that we should have uniforms. Maybe having uniforms would get us motivated to do something more. But there was really very little money for anything, let alone band uniforms. So he looked around, and he finally came up with some uniforms that were a little different. They were like a vest with straps that just covered the front and straps that held it, that went around your back and held that vest on. It had a little high collar and a cape that was attached across the shoulders. I'm sure we had some kind of a hat too, but then we had to go to a store in Zanesville and buy a particular kind of white duck pants to wear with our uniform. But we had to buy our own white duck pants. I have a picture. We thought those uniforms were pretty pretty strange, but I have a picture that they took of the band. I think it's on the steps in front of the college gymnasium, and they look amazingly good. I think when we marched and those capes flapped and whatever we had on underneath was showing, I don't know how good they looked. But anyway, we had a band, and the town seemed to be satisfied, and we'd show off on Memorial Days. I remember Pearl Harbor. I was playing with my friend Jean at her house, and her father was listening to the radio, and then he made us be very, very quiet so that he could hear better. And he was listening to the announcements about Pearl Harbor, and when it finished, he told us about what he had been listening to and what had happened. And he made it so clear, and that and I could never forget. As a child, I wouldn't have understood that it made any difference, but he helped us to to know that this was something that was really important. After the war started, we were living in New Concord, and my dad, every summer, or at least at the beginning of the war, he went to Cleveland to work in the shipyards. They needed the workers, and we needed the money, and so he went. He stayed with my uncle who lived in Cleveland, and he spent the summer there. Well, I don't remember whether he was there for one summer or 2 summers or whatever, but it would probably have been more than one. But while he was there in the summer, one year, he found a new job teaching in the Cuyahoga Heights High School. He was hired to teach science classes, and this was a small school, special. But at the end of the summer, we moved from New Concord and moved to Independence, Ohio, which is a suburb just south of Cleveland and just south of Cuyahoga Heights. This was a rich school system. The reason that they had lots of money was that it was a small school district with not very many students, and there were several large war production factories that paid taxes in their district, and so the school was small, and there was plenty of money to do whatever they wanted to do. They had all kinds of things that no other school had. They had a greenhouse. They had a foundry. They had a photography program. They had all kinds of things that might be helpful in training the students. Now, when I say it was a small school, when I graduated, I think that we had like 35 people in our graduating class, 35 or 36. So it really was small, and everybody had a chance to do the good things. For me, one of my favorite activities was that I got to be part of a group of 9 girls called a triple trio, and we'd been put together by our music teacher, Miss West, and we had all kinds of wonderful things that we could manage to do. I remember particularly the Christmas programs. We would put on Christmas programs at different places in Cleveland that wanted something a little, special for their Christmas things, and we really got special treatment, and so that was a wonderful thing. When I was in high school, one big thing that happened was the end of World War II. VJ Day was really, really a big thing. and my dad took us, and we went down into the center of Cleveland, and it was exciting. Everybody headed for there, and so for a young teen, it was something quite exciting, and I still remember how thrilled I was that we had a chance to go and celebrate the end of that horrible war. And we did in that school. I remember we would have things at our school, and students would come from other schools. And I remember one time seeing some kid that was visiting, going up and down the halls and trying to peer into the classrooms. And I said, "Hi, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I just wanted to see if everything in there were gold-plated." So we really did have a lot more than other people had. One of the things that happened was that we were the first school in Ohio to have a driver education program. We had a special car that had dual clutch and brake, because at that point there really weren't any automatic transmissions, or certainly not. Mostly there weren't. I don't know if there might have been a few, but we learned on a car and learned how to shift gears. Well, because we were the very first, we had to be the example. We had to prove that this was really a good program to have in schools. And our teacher was one of the coaches, and he would take us 3 at a time to show, to work with us on driving. And in our group of 3, I remember that I was the first one that he put behind the wheel in the driver's seat. And he showed me, he told me what to do to turn the car on and where the accelerator was. But I didn't even think about asking, once I get it started, how do I stop? And off we went. And all of a sudden there was a fence in front of us, and I didn't know what to do. I was panicked. Well, Coach waited until he thought I was really, really panicked enough, and then he put his foot on the brake on his side of the car. And I learned that you not only have to go, but you have to stop at the right time too. When we finished that class, they made sure that we learned everything. I remember that when we did parallel parking, that they made us learn to parallel park on a curved curb with a slope down. It was really a little crazy thing, but once we could pass that, we were all pretty good at parallel parking. I was really thankful for that because it came in so handy a lot of times, and it surprised a lot of people to see a girl or a woman pull into a parallel park with no problem at all. So when we finished the class, a reporter came to talk to us, and we were then featured in the Cleveland Plain Dealer with a picture of us with our car and a little story to tell about this new program that we were involved in. It was pretty exciting. We thought it was a big thing. And of course, we all kept copies of the clipping of the newspaper article. And I'm sure that someplace I still have that clipping. It was also during high school that I began dating. And we had a small class, and we sort of hung together. And so there were a group of us that always went together and went to things together. And we had, it was a fun group. Well, one night, one evening, we went someplace, and then we went to my friend's home and had some ice cream. One of the boys was a really good photographer. He really was a good photographer, and he always had his camera with him, and he took pictures, and he had a particular picture that he decided he wanted to try to take, and so he said, "We need to turn the lights out so that I can see what I can do with this." And so we turned the lights out. He took his picture, and we turned the lights back on again. 3 or 4 minutes maybe. The lights were out. We didn't think anything about it. It was, but a few days later, my dad wanted to know more about that evening that we had, because somebody had gone by when the lights and seen, somebody had gone by and seen the cars out in front and no lights on inside. Oh, small community, small school, Well, so that was a lesson, another lesson, but that one was in avoiding even the very appearance of anything that you might be doing that might look wrong. The summer after high school, I had this great chance to go to aquatic school. I loved to swim, and the Red Cross was offering a chance to go to aquatic school. It was in Lake Michigan, at the south end of Lake Michigan in Indiana, and so they took us out there on a bus, and for a couple of weeks we spent 8 hours a day in the lake, and it was great. We learned all kinds of things, and we did other activities like canoeing and other things that would relate to water safety. And then we taught swimming lessons when we came back for the Red Cross. Well, in the fall, then I started college. I went to Muskingum College in Ohio, and for my PE class, I took some swimming things, and because I had a water safety instructor's badge on my suit from going to aquatic school, I got a chance to work with some of the students who were having problems, wanted to swim or swim better, but were having some problems, and I had this wonderful chance. The person I remember from that time was a girl who was, I think she was afraid. She was afraid of the water, and so when she'd get in the water, she couldn't relax. Instead, she fought against the water. She couldn't relax enough to learn that the water would help her to stay up if she would let it do that. And then use her strong shoulders and the strength of her body to move forward instead of just fighting against the water itself. In the years since then, I've thought about her and thought about how she fought against something that should have been a help to her. And sometimes when I have struggled against the spirit who is trying to help me move forward, and to something that was important to me, she would remind me and help me. Remembering that experience was something that helped me to work with the spirit instead of fight against it sometimes. Well, Muskingum was where I met my husband. As is often true, that wouldn't have happened if life had gone the way I wanted it to go. There were no sororities at Muskingum. They had what they called social clubs. And at the end of your freshman year, everybody was expected to join a social club. It was provided social life and place to eat and housing, and so it was just part of the life on campus. So when I was a freshman, my friends had decided that they were going to join the Kainu Club. Well, yeah, that sounded okay. So I just thought, okay, that's what I'll do too. But I didn't make any effort whatsoever to make it happen. And in the end, they joined the Kainu Club, and I joined another club called the Wayan Club. It wasn't really what I had planned to do or what I expected to do, not what I had in mind at all. But it was that one thing that was important. Our cook in our clubhouse was named Mrs. B, and we called her Mrs. B. And in the summertime, there weren't very many students there, and they she didn't cook in our clubhouse during summer school. Instead, she cooked at her own house, and we went to her house for our meals. And she also had other students who came and signed up to have their meals with her. Well, the summer after my sophomore year, I went to summer school, and I ate at Mrs. B's, and there were a lot of interesting and fun people who were there, and one of them was named Tom Shields, and he kept everybody laughing. And I really wasn't particularly impressed, but one day I was sitting on the porch in the swing, and he came over and sat down beside me and said, "How would you like to go to a movie?" And I said, I really wasn't particularly interested. Thanks, no. And then, for some reason that I can't really explain, I said, "Oh, well, what's the movie and who else is going?" I don't remember what the movie was, but it was something that I thought I wanted to see, and one of my friends was going, and so I said, "Well, okay, I guess that I could go." And so we went. We had a wonderful time. And for the rest of the summer, we continued to have a wonderful time. In the fall, we got engaged at Thanksgiving. He went home to his family, and I went home to mine, but neither one of us wanted to do that. We just wanted to stay and be together. The first day after we finished our exams at Christmas time, we got married. After we married, we moved into what was the GI Village at Muskingum on the edge of campus. Bunch of old war surplus trailers that were mostly empty at that point, because right after the war there were many GIs who were there, who had come back and gotten married and gone to school. But by 1950, they were pretty much finished, and so there we were in this old beat-up trailer. It didn't have any running water. It didn't have a stove. We got a little hot plate that really was not very effective. It had a little tiny ice box, but since there weren't very many people in those trailers anymore, they no longer delivered ice, and we didn't have any way to get ice. And the bathhouse was far enough away, and it was a cold winter, that I remember one time, after taking a shower, running back to our trailer, and by the time I got there, it had been far enough and cold enough that my hair was frozen stiff. So it was it was a challenge. It was heated by a little old kerosene heater by the door that had just gasping its last, I think. Anyway, we were there for a semester, and in the fall, Tom transferred to Ohio State, but I still had a semester that I needed to finish at Muskingum, and so I moved into Mrs. B's house and stayed there for that semester. And on the weekends, I would drive to Columbus so that we could spend the weekend together. And that was a really hard time. One more thing that happened while we were in that trailer at Muskingum. One Friday, I managed to stay home, and I decided that I was going to make a couple of pies. Well, we had this little inefficient thing to cook on, and I had gotten a metal thing to sit on one of the burners that was supposed to act like an oven, but it wasn't insulated, and it was almost useless. Nevertheless, I tried to make pies, and so I got them put together, and then it took all day long to get them to bake in that funny little metal thing on the top of that burner. So when they were done, they looked wonderful. They looked great, and they smelled good, and I could hardly wait for Tom to come home to see what I had done for him. And so when he finished classes, he got home and he looked at the pies and he said, "Oh yeah, those look wonderful." But he had something else on his mind, and the next thing he said was, "Why don't we get ready and go down to Adena and visit my parents for the weekend?" Okay. So I asked him, what do you want to do with these pies? "Oh, yeah, okay. Well, why don't we give them to our neighbors and let's go." Mistake. But he didn't realize it. Anyway, that's what we did. We packed up, we gave the pies to our neighbors, and we went to visit his parents for the weekend. It was a chance to get away and, think forward 2 or 3 years. I can't remember where we were, but I heard this monstrous groan. Oh, how could I have done that? For some reason, at that point, he had thought about those pies. Well, he hadn't seen very many pies in the meantime, for reasons that are pretty obvious, it seems to me. It finally dawned on him what he had done when I had spent all day making pies and he had given them to the neighbors. When we went to Ohio State, we got into the GI Village there. It was rickety, had more space, and we had lots of wonderful neighbors. Tom was working on an engineering degree. It was metallurgical engineering. One of the neat things about it was that we could walk to the football games on Saturdays, and we were there during Woody Hayes' first year, and Ohio State hadn't been very kind to its coaches, and if you didn't produce right away, you were gone. And so every time something would happen that wasn't wonderful, everybody in the stands would start singing "Goodbye, Woody, goodbye, Woody," and going to those games was a real. We loved going to the Ohio State games. The first person that we met when we moved into the GI Village was a neighbor who lived upstairs, and his name was Cliff Spendlove, and he stopped and welcomed us, and we became really good friends. Well, his cousin also came, and they lived in a building close by, and we got to know them too. Both of these young men were working on their PhDs, and they were Mormons. We didn't know what that meant, but anyway, they were really good friends as we got to know them. And I got a job at Ohio Bell Telephone, worked there for a while, and then had a chance to work at the Ohio State Library, and did that for a while. And then I got a job in Worthington, Ohio, teaching 5th grade. One of the teachers there was friendly, and we got to know each other, and her name was Pat Bevan. At one point in the fall, she said to me, would you go with me to a minstrel show that my church is putting on? My husband is in it, and I'd like to have somebody to go with me. And I said, sure, that sounds good. Why don't we do that? And when the show started, I recognized one of the stars, one of the main characters in the show. She was a woman who lived in the same building that we lived in. When we walked out our door, there was her door across the hall. Oh, well, I was surprised to see her in a church show. She was not the greatest person we had ever met. We had a lot of problems because she wrote a lot of bad checks. And whenever we would try to cash a check, they were always suspicious because our address was the same as hers, except that there was a letter after the numbers, and her letter was A and ours was B. So that was kind of a surprise to find her out there, but we didn't really think anything more about it. In the meantime, Tom was taking classes, and he was enjoying everything he was doing, and he had made a friend from one of his classes, and they studied together and became good friends, and in fact, they became good enough friends that his friend, and I don't remember his name, invited him to go home with his family and spend the summer with his family in Utah. It was getting to be pretty interesting, some of the things that were happening and the friends that we were making. Near the time, as we got near the time when we were finishing at Ohio State, Cliff's cousin Rex showed up at our door on a Saturday morning, all dressed in a white shirt and a tie. On Saturday seemed strange. But he came in and he said, I'd like to teach you something about what our church believes. Would you be willing to have me come and talk to you about it? Oh, yeah, you bet. We would have been interested in having him come and teach us if he had been Hindu or Catholic or Muslim or whatever. It was interesting, and yeah, sure. So come on in, He said, no, I'd like to come back and teach you over, a period of time, a little bit now and a little bit later. Okay, that's fine. And so one of the very best teachers in the whole world took us under his arm and started teaching us the gospel, and we loved it. Well, as we got really close to leaving, Rex asked us about being baptized. For some reason, we were taken by surprise and said, no, we're not ready for that. So I think he was a bit disappointed. But we took some time and went to New York, to Long Island, where Tom had gotten a job, to look for a place to live. And while we were there, we took the time, we made it a point of finding the local chapel. Was the Uniondale ward. And then we wanted to be sure that wherever we lived was close enough that we could get there without too much trouble. So we found a little house in Levittown, New York, that was, it took maybe half an hour to get there, but it wasn't too far away. So when we went back and told Rex and his wife what we had done while we were there, that we had looked up the chapel, they were absolutely thrilled. And before we left, in spite of the fact that we didn't let them baptize us, they had a get-together, a party for us, and invited invited the Columbus ward members, or branch members at that time probably, and we had a party. And when we got to the party, we were surprised, because here were not only the Spendloves and the cousins, but here was Pat Bevan, my friend from teaching, and her husband, and the friend Tom had made in class that had invited us to Utah, and some others. interesting the way the Lord works to guide us and push us in the direction He wants us to go. When we left Ohio State, we moved to Long Island, to Levittown, New York. When we got there, we found the chapel, went to church, and waited for the missionaries to come. Well, we waited and waited, and one day I looked out the window and saw them coming up toward our door. I rushed out and I cried at them, "Where have you been? We've been waiting for you." Well, they hadn't wanted us to feel like they were really pushing it too hard. And so they had given us time to get settled in, and we were expecting them immediately. Well, again, they were wonderful teachers. Elder Thornley was the elder that we met with most, Dick Thornley. And he, as I said, he was a good teacher. And when he found out what, he said, well, we'll run through everything again. But then he found out just how well we had been taught in the first place. And so what he did, he started digging to find new material, new things that would be of value to us. And so we had a chance to learn a lot of things in greater depth. As members of the Uniondale Ward, was like being with family. Everybody had several callings. I think I counted 5 at one point that I had. And not long after we were baptized, they decided to put on a 3-act play. Well, we both landed good roles in that and had a wonderful time, got to know people really, really well. And the stake drama director was a help to us, too. The stake drama director was named Leora Thatcher. She was a marvelous character actress on Broadway. And we had this opportunity to have her help us and work with us. And she was a nice influence in our lives. Well, while we were living in Levittown, and after we had been married for over 5 years, we finally found that we were going to have a child. We were thrilled. We had even talked to agencies about adopting, and they had discouraged it, and so this was a great thing. And I was healthy and happy, and we kept really busy. And one Saturday, I don't know what we were working on, but we had been working at it pretty hard all day. And so we were tired, and we were heading home, and we decided to stop and see some of our friends. Well, they had 5 or 6 children, and they were just darling children. As soon as we got there, they all ran and threw their arms around us. It was wonderful. didn't occur to me that there was a problem that they had mumps. Everybody I knew when I was a child had mumps, except me. And I just figured that I couldn't get mumps, and so I didn't think anything more about it. Well, a little later, I can't remember how long it takes, but a little later, you should have seen me. You couldn't find my neck because it was, the mumps were, everything was so swollen, and then I had this big belly, and so I really was a sight. And during this time, while I was sick, Tom had to go on a business trip, and one of the man who was his ward teaching partner, he and his wife decided that I should come and stay with them while he was gone. And so I did. I went and stayed with the McVeys for that period of time and got to be really good friends with June. And in fact, we became good enough friends that as Christmas approached, they invited us to spend Christmas Eve with them. And we had a beautiful time. It was really lovely. The only problem was that we managed to forget our camera and leave it at their house. And 2 or 3 days later, I was in the hospital, and our beautiful little daughter was born. So we needed that camera. And Tom, a day or so later, Tom headed out to their home to pick up the camera. And when he got there, they were waiting for somebody to come because Bill, the husband, and his friend were going to go duck hunting on Long Island Sound. And his friend never did appear. He just didn't come. And so they talked Tom into going with Bill duck hunting. And they put him in all the clothing that would keep him warm and dry and so forth, and off they went, towing their trailer, towing their boat, and headed for Huntington Bay. Well, something happened to that boat that day in Huntington Bay, and nobody has discovered exactly what it was. But Bill's body washed up on the beach that evening and was found by the police. And in the spring, when the water began to warm up, Tom's body was recovered as well. So I sold our little home in Levittown and took my baby daughter Allison, and we went back to Cleveland to stay with my parents for a little while. Tom was buried in Independence, Ohio, in the spring of 1957. After a few weeks, we headed back. I took Allison and we went back to Ohio to live with my parents to sort of get life settled, and that worked out for a short period of time. But then I wanted to make it work on my own, and so moved from my parents' home in Cleveland to Columbus, where I got a job in a children's hospital in the dietary department, and was there for a few months, getting my feet on the ground and enjoying my sweet little girl and having a chance to take her out for walks in the park, and it was a really very nice time. In the meantime, a friend from college, Cynthia Baldwin, had moved and was teaching, I think, in Independence, where my parents were. And so I would see her every once in a while. And she decided she was going to move to Honolulu. That sounded pretty exciting, and she wanted somebody to go with her. And I said, no. There was no way I could handle that. Moving to Columbus had been a leap, but going to Hawaii, I didn't think I could do that. Well, she talked to me. She kept talking to me about it, and so I made a long list of things that had to fall into place if I was going to do this, and I knew, there was just no way that was going to happen. But I made the list, and I started checking them off and checking them out and seeing what I could do, and they all just worked. It was kind of amazing. But the last thing on my list was I was going to talk to my parents, and I knew that they were being very protective, and the idea of my moving to Hawaii would never fly past them. But everything else had worked, and so I went back to visit with them and told them what I was thinking, and they said, "Oh, that sounds like fun. Why don't you do that?" I was amazed. I was amazed, and feel like it was a bit of a miracle that all of those things fell together. I've always been watched over and guided throughout my life, and I feel like this is one of those instances when the Lord was guiding me and saying, "Here, go and do this." And so we packed up and moved our things back to my parents' house, and off we went with Cynthia to drive across the United States, and then off to Honolulu. We went to Honolulu, and Cynthia had some friends, and she went and stayed with them, and I found a little studio apartment with a little help from, I think it was the stake president, I'm not sure. Anyway, we had this fairly bare little studio apartment. And the thing that we weren't there for very long, but the thing that I remember was that when we moved in, there was this huge bug. I mean, it was like 2 inches long. It was humongous. I had never seen anything like it. And so I got some bug spray, and I sprayed it. Didn't even faze it. Well, so I sprayed it some more, and I kept spraying it, and it started acting just sort of like it was a little drunk, and it started wandering up on the walls, and I kept spraying it and spraying it. I must have used a whole can of spray on it, and it still kept going. And finally, as it was trying to climb up the wall, it finally fell off the wall and onto the floor on its back, and I sprayed it again, and it finally got it, and I wouldn't touch the thing, so I got a little piece of paper and slid it up under and I literally dragged that piece of paper out the door and left it outside the door. And then I called Cynthia, and I said, "Oh, this bug, it was huge. It was terrible." She said, "It's a cockroach." And I said, No, it's not a cockroach. It's huge." She said, "It's a cockroach." Well, I found out it really was a cockroach. And so that was my first experience with what cockroaches can be like in the Pacific, on Pacific Islands. And I had lots of experience with that afterward. But that was my very first experience learning what cockroaches looked like on Pacific Islands. I lived in several different apartments, just as I'd find something that I liked a little bit better, and so we moved around and finally moved into an apartment that had a neat view of the harbor, and it was really nice. I had made a friend with Kay Matayoshi, who was in our ward, and she and I moved into this apartment together. It had no furniture in it. The people in the ward donated whatever they had that they weren't using, and we had some strange things, but it was fun, and we enjoyed it. And Allison was happy and loved Kay, and Kay really loved Allison too, and so she was a really delightful friend. Later, we lived in Honolulu for 4 or 5 years, and we shared that apartment for maybe a year, something like that. I don't remember exactly. But later, when there was a time when Kay and another friend, Bessie Ueda, and Mary Powell, the 4 of us would get together every Friday afternoon, and I had a little Volkswagen Bug, and so I would drive, and they brought food, and I picked them up on Friday afternoons, and we headed out to the other side of the island to the temple on Friday afternoons. It was so fun. We just enjoyed that time that we had together so much, and we took Allison along, and there was a woman, I can't remember, we just called her Grandma, that a Hawaiian woman that took care of Allison while we went to the temple, and they played with Allison, and they brought food, and we ate along the way. Wonderful food that I enjoyed, and Allison played games with them. It was an absolute delight. Those Friday afternoons are so memorable. Other people knew that we were going too, and so when somebody would come that tried to find who was going to the temple, we occasionally picked up an extra passenger to take along, because the bishop knew that we were doing this, and it was Kay also took care of a lot of things for me. When we left Honolulu, we left, and I hadn't been able to sell my little car, my little VW, and so Kay took care of that for me, and she just was always there. She was such a good and wonderful friend, a great blessing in my life. Cynthia found, who I had gone to Honolulu with, had found a house that she and another friend wanted to live in Manoa Valley, and it had 3 bedrooms and was a little expensive for them, and so we, the 3 of us, decided that we would move into this house in Manoa Valley, and we did, and that worked for a while, and then they wanted something in Waikiki, and so they moved, and I found some girls that had just come from Utah, and they were looking for a place to live, and so they came, and it was amazing. We had these beautiful young women who were living there, and there were always, usually, at least 3 or 4, and as a result of all those wonderful girls who went to Waikiki Ward, they attracted all of the young men who were in the Navy, and they were mostly in the Navy, and who would go to Waikiki Ward, and then they would come to our house, because that's where these girls were living. And so we had a place that was just full of young people all the time, and it was the bus driver that came up in that area always knew where these young men were going, and they'd say to them, "Going up to the house today, are you?" And so we had parties that lasted for days. It was just a wonderful time. And when people would come and visit, we lived in Makiki Ward. All the girls went to Waikiki Ward. Allison and I went to Makiki Ward. So people who came to either of those wards who were visiting seemed to eventually end up at the house for a little while. One time there was a young man, I don't remember his name, I don't remember a whole lot about him, but he was coming through, and he was on his way to New Zealand, and so he got brought up by somebody to the house, and we were always having some kind of social activity, and so. But I remember him telling us about how he was going to New Zealand. He was one of the special few that was selected to go, and was hired by the church to teach at the Church College of New Zealand. And that sounded so interesting to me. And he assured me that it was a very it was not an opportunity that everybody could manage, but I was excited about it. And so along the way somewhere, I checked with the church educational system and got an application and sent in my application to go to work in the one of the CES schools. And I was thinking that really what I wanted to do was to go to New Zealand. Well, he was right. I didn't really get much response from them, and so the years went by, and I always remembered about that. In the meantime, I went to the University of Hawaii and took classes, took a specialty in school librarianship. And so I prepared and had a certificate. So I had teaching certificates in elementary and high school and school librarianship. And so I sent some more information and told them that I had this qualification. It didn't seem to make any difference. And so I got a school library position in a junior high in Pearl City. And in the meantime, Allison was old enough to start in the first grade. So she went to first grade in the Pearl City Elementary, and I was in the junior high, and so that worked out for us pretty well at that time. Another friend, one of the boys, one of the young men who came to the house in Honolulu was a German boy who had escaped from East Germany and joined the army to get American citizenship, and he would come to the house too. He was the only one that I remember that was in the army, but he enjoyed coming just like everybody else. And when it came to the point where I was planning to leave, and I had talked about going to Germany. I wanted to go to Germany, and he said, "Ooh, I'm going to Germany. I will set something up for you. I will find you a place to stay. Plan on going to Germany." And so when we left, we went back to stay for a little while with my parents again, and then on to Germany. In the meantime, I lost track of Reiner, but I had already planned to go to Germany. So we went, but we didn't have a place to stay. So we went to the Swiss temple, to Zollikofen, and there was a family there who liked to rent out a room, and so they had a room that we could rent for a little bit of time, and we did. And so Allison went to kindergarten and seemed to enjoy it, except for one thing. All the little girls wore a dress all week and had a clean apron on every day. And she had people give her little dresses they wanted to. And so she had lots of little dresses that people had given us. And so every day she went to kindergarten with a different dress on. And after a while she said, I want to wear an apron like all the other little girls. I don't want to wear. So she felt really different. And right about that time, I didn't have an apron for her, but we were only there for a short time. While we were there would be groups that would come to the temple, and one of the groups that came to visit the temple was the English-speaking branch from Heidelberg, Germany. And when they found us there, they said, come to our branch. You would love living in Heidelberg. And the branch president told me that he knew of a place where we could live, and he would arrange for somebody to meet the train. And so yes, we should come. They would love to have us in the branch. So that's what we did. We went to Heidelberg and became members of the Heidelberg branch. After I got there, I knew I had to have some way to get around. And in the meantime, Kay had sold my little Volkswagen in Honolulu, and it gave me enough money to buy a new one in Germany. So I bought a little Volkswagen so that I could get around. One of the people in the ward was a German girl named Dorinda, and she would come to the English-speaking branch occasionally because she had lived in the United States for a while and wanted to keep her English going. And we became really good friends, and so life was good in the Heidelberg branch. Not only that, but I had time, and so the branch president just kept giving me assignments. I was going out and doing all kinds of things and so I said that I spent my time in the Heidelberg branch playing Relief Society. He called me to be a counselor in the Relief Society presidency, and I remember him saying, the secretary was a woman who liked to take the lead, and he said, now you remember that she's the secretary and you're in the presidency, and so you and the president are the ones that make the decisions. He was right about her. She was a person who was very capable, and did enjoy running things, but it worked out really well. In the place that we lived in, Heidelberg, we lived in a room, and we had two elders rooms on each side of us, and we all shared a little kitchen and a bathroom, and so it was kind of fun. At Thanksgiving, somebody brought us a turkey, and we made a Thanksgiving dinner, and the elders ate like they hadn't ever eaten before. It was lots of fun. And then at Christmas time, we decided we'd put up a Christmas tree in the little hallway that we had. So at the end of the hall, we put up a Christmas tree, and I don't remember what we put on it except that we decorated it with something, and then we got candles, little candle holders they were still being used, and so we put these little candle holders all over and put candles on the tree, got a big bucket of water, and then we lit the candles on Christmas Eve so that we had this beautiful Christmas tree that was lit up with candles, and we were ready in case anything happened because we had buckets of water. But nothing happened, and we blew out the candles, and so we had wonderful time with the elders that were in that district. They loved Allison and enjoyed having her there, and it made their Christmas really, really special because they had a child to spoil at Christmas time. Allison had really seemed to enjoy the kindergarten in Zollikofen, but when we were in Germany and we tried to find a kindergarten for her there, she was not at all happy, and she would run away from school, from the little school, and it was a Catholic kindergarten, and I don't know. I don't know if the nuns frightened her. I just don't know what the problem was, but she ran away a couple of times, and so it was frightening to think that she would run away and I wouldn't know where she was, and so that was the end. That was the end of kindergarten for her, and there were children in the neighborhood, and in fact there was at least one American child, but she didn't speak German and they wouldn't speak English, so that didn't work out for her either, and so it finally came to the point where I felt like she was really very unhappy, and so I made arrangements to have her go back to stay with my parents, and so we took her to the plane, and the arrangements had been made, and she flew back to Ohio from Frankfurt, and stayed with my parents for 2 or 3 months before I returned. I made arrangements to ship my car back to the United States, and then just shortly before I had planned to leave, I got a message that my father had a severe heart attack, and he was in the hospital, and they just didn't know how things were going to go. And so arrangements had been made for my flight and for me to leave and go back to Cleveland, and so that's what I did. My dad was in and out of the hospital then for a while, and finally the time came that the doctor said he could go home, and so he was to go home the next day when we were visiting with him, and my mother and my uncle, his brother, were talking with him when he said, "Wait, something's happening here," and he died. It was a very difficult thing for me because I had always been close to my dad. He'd always been right there in the school building that I was in when I was in school. And so he'd always been around. He'd always been there when I needed help. And so it was difficult, but I felt like I needed to stay with my mother for a while. And so I really didn't want to stay. I didn't want to be there permanently. I wanted to go and live my own life, but I felt that if I looked for something that I could do that would keep me there for a specific length of time. And so at that point, I decided to go to Western Reserve University and get a degree in library science. And so I spent a year working on a Master of Science in Library Science was what it was called. And when that year was up, then I started looking for jobs throughout the United States. I looked and interviewed and with a number of places, and it came down to two places that I was particularly interested in. The first place was in Washington State, and that was the one that I really wanted. And they said, well, that there were certain things they had to go through. They were telling me that they would like to have me come, but there were things that had to be approved, and this went on for a little while. And in the meantime, I was also talking to the schools in Lexington, Massachusetts, and the thing just wasn't coming through from Washington. And so Lexington offered me a position, and I accepted it. And of course, it was only a day or two later that Washington came through. But as I said, that I've been watched over and guided and directed through most of my life, and so this was the case here, that I obviously was supposed to go to Lexington. And so Allison and I packed up and headed for Lexington, where we had a lovely apartment, and it was enjoyable to be there. One of the things that made it easy and was that our bishop was Bishop Isaacson, Henry Isaacson, and he was also one of the assistant superintendents in the school district, and they just sort of pulled us into their family, and we enjoyed that. And Allison, when she'd get out of school, she would go to the Isaacsons, and she really enjoyed doing that. They had a number of children, and they enjoyed her, and she liked to go there, and then I would go and pick her up. And so we made good friends with the Isaacsons. Sister Isaacson said to me one day, "Didn't you tell me that you had applied with the church schools because you wanted to go to New Zealand?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Well, we just got our church news. The church news in those days got mailed out by slow slow, whatever. And it took weeks sometimes for them to get across the country. She had gotten a church news from several weeks before, and then when she was looking through it, there was an ad in there saying that the Church College of New Zealand was looking for a librarian. She said, I saw that and I knew that that's where you had wanted to go. So I went home and I sent a letter off to Salt Lake to CES, and I said, I've kept you up to date on my education and preparations and everything, and I wondered what else I needed to do for you to consider my application. Well, the letter got there pretty quickly, and I came home from school a few days later, and I got a telephone call, and it was from one of the administrators in CES. His name was Keith Oakes, and he said, "We lost your application. We sent somebody that had a family. We really didn't want to send somebody with a big family down there, but we did because we couldn't find anybody else, and your application had gotten carried to another office, and so we didn't have it available. But I'd like to talk to you. We have another opening that I'd like to talk to you about." And I said, "Well, no, I really am not interested. I really was only interested in the one in New Zealand. That sounded really good to me." And he said, "Well, let me come and talk to you. Just let me come and talk to you about it." And so he flew out to Boston, and we met in Cambridge at the chapel, and he told me about the other positions that were there, that there was an opening in Samoa and there was an opening in Tonga, and he said, "I just think that you ought to go to Tonga." It wasn't what I had planned on, and I had discouraged him from coming because I felt guilty, because I really wasn't going to accept the position. But after I talked to him, the Spirit said, this is what you ought to do. And so we left Lexington and headed for the South Pacific. Moving and getting everything ready and heading for the South Pacific was exciting. And I'd lived several years in Honolulu, and so I thought, oh, I know what it's like to live on a Pacific island. This will be fine. We'll work this out. And Allison was about 8 years old, something like that, 7 or 8, and she didn't like the idea. But I showed her Tonga. She loved fish, and so I showed her Tonga on the map, this little tiny dot on the map, and I said, "Just think of all the fish we can eat. Look at all that ocean that's around there." And so she was convinced, and we headed off, and I was just sure that everything was going to be just wonderful because I had lived and worked with Polynesian people and on a Pacific island. Well, when the flight from Honolulu, we flew to Honolulu and then south from there, and the flight from Honolulu took us to American Samoa. When we landed in American Samoa and got into that airport, I thought, what have I gotten us into? Because it was nothing like Honolulu. Just the whole atmosphere, the whole feel of it was just so much more native, primitive. I don't know what to say, but it was not anything like Honolulu. And so we were just there long enough to get a little plane over to Western Samoa, and from Western Samoa we took Polynesian Airways, a rickety old plane, and flew from Western Samoa to Tonga on this. I remember that plane. You entered it in the back, and it was a steep walk to get up to the seats that we were assigned. We flew, and that plane flew so close to the ocean that there would be spray from the waves on the windows, and it was just a real revelation, a real wonder about whether I had done something that was going to be all right. We arrived in Tonga, and getting into Tonga in those days was not easy. They were not welcoming anybody, but we had our visas, and so we could go. And so the plane landed at the airport, which was just a little shack with a big green field beside it, and so we had arrived. We had arrived in Tonga. The church school in Tonga is called Liahona High School, and it's out a number of miles out away from Nuku'alofa, which is the capital city. And so we arrived, and it was a small island, and so it just everything felt wet. We put sheets on the bed and climbed into bed, and it felt like the sheets were sopping wet. It was really an experience. Everything turned to mold, and we were in a little duplex that we grew to love, but the shower was next to the front door, in a hallway next to the front door, and so it was not exactly wonderful and convenient in many ways, but we learned to love to be in Tonga. So Liahona was a high school, but there were a lot of children there, a lot of American children, and so they had what they called a side school. And Allison was enrolled in this little side school with all of the other American children, and it was, and she had, her teacher was a wonderful woman named Lily White, who again, she and her husband were very good friends of ours. And when we went to New Zealand, they were also in New Zealand, and so we enjoyed their friendship a whole lot. The library was a disaster at Liahona, and so I studied it for a few weeks. But the very first day that I was there, the Tongan kids were just were quite interesting, and they bright, wonderful people. The first day I was there, this cute little girl came nipping in to the library, grabbed a book, made sure I saw that she had grabbed a book, and ran out. And just laughing the whole time. She just figured that this was a good trick to play on one of the new Americans, because the Americans couldn't figure out what was going on, and they could just prove, let me know that I was not in charge of anything here. Well, she figured I couldn't tell her from any of the rest of them, but this was one of the times that, having lived in Honolulu and in Hawaii, was a help to me. So I knew who that little girl was. I mean, I did, I could recognize her. I could remember her. And so I went out and went through each classroom, looked for her, and finally found her in one of the classrooms. She really had done me a big favor, even though I didn't know it, because when I found her and pulled her out of that classroom to let her know that I wanted that book back, the whole school knew about it. All the students knew. Here, they weren't. It wasn't going to be that easy to pull the wool over my eyes. And so it all started out really well for me, in spite of the fact that it was a strange thing that happened. And then the next thing that happened that I remember was that in those days we used film strips. And so the would come in, and the library was anyway, it was a real mess, but we found a place to show film strips. And so somebody arranged he wanted a film strip of ancient Egypt that he had used before, and so we set it up. And I stayed to listen for a little bit to see what he was doing with a film strip from ancient Egypt. And the thing that impressed me most, was that he would show the film strips and he would say, look, that's just like we do it. And so he was using this film strip from ancient Egypt to teach them something by showing them that their life at that point was pretty primitive, and was making these big comparisons to ancient Egypt. It taught me a lot about what life in the villages of Tonga was. While we were in Tonga, Queen Salote, who had been the queen, the system there was one of a queen or a king, and Queen Salote had been the queen for a long time, but then there were then in the villages and throughout the islands there were the nobles, and it hadn't been too long since nobles had life and death power over the people that they had, and so the people were accustomed to having fairly rigid, someone very rigidly rule over them. But things had changed and were slowly changing. And during the time that we were there, Queen Salote, who had been the queen for a number of years, died. It was an interesting kind of a thing because there was one radio station, and the radio station now only played the hymns that Queen Salote had written. And everybody in Tonga wore black, except the students in school, and they wore a black armband. And for 6 months, there was a mourning period. And at the end of the 6-month mourning period, then Queen Salote's son, Taufahau Tupou the Fourth, I think it was crowned king. And this was a huge affair. I took lots of pictures during the mourning period and during the funeral, Queen Salote's funeral, and then the world descended on Tonga for the coronation, and it was something I'd never seen before. I mean, it was it was absolutely amazing. And again, I had a chance to take pictures of the activities, both during the mourning period and during the celebration for the coronation. Being in Tonga was probably one of the true highlights of my life and all the places that we have lived. When we were ready to leave Tonga, we knew we were going to New Zealand afterward, but at the end of every contract we got a chance to travel home, and home, as far as they were concerned, we had come from Boston, and so we had a trip back to Boston. Well, when I kind of checked it out, I found out that going from Tonga to Boston and back to New Zealand was pretty much the same as going around the world. And so I checked into that, and sure enough, it was. We could go around the world and only have to pay an extra little tiny bit. So there were no travel agents in Tonga, so I found a travel agent in Hong Kong that helped me. What we planned to do was we had friends that were going at the same time, and so we were going to Australia and take a ship to Hong Kong. And then from Hong Kong, we were going to take another ship and go through the Suez Canal and have a chance to stop in, Egypt and Israel. But it was right at that time, in 1967, I think it was, that they closed the Suez Canal, and so all our plans went down the drain as far as taking a ship back through the Canal and through the Mediterranean. So the travel agent, we worked with the travel agent by slow mail and got things set up so that we still traveled that direction, but we flew. At that time, when you left Tonga, you had a piece of paper, and everybody who had any kind of a little store or where you could possibly owe them any money had to sign you off. And so there was a piece of paper that was filled, and everybody had to be checked off. Oh, that was an interesting thing. But we finally got ready to go, and we traveled to Sydney. When we were in Sydney, we found this little restaurant that you went down 3 or 4 steps, and it was just a place that we really liked. And they gave Allison a menu, and she loved that place and loved having that menu. And when we came back and went to New Zealand, she used that menu to with our friends to have lunches and dinners. It was kind of fun. In Sydney, then we caught a freighter that took passengers. It was a great experience. They only took maybe a dozen passengers, and there were 5 of us that were traveling together, and they had nice big staterooms, and it was a Chinese ship, and the food was absolutely wonderful. There was no swimming pool, and the kids wanted to have a swimming pool if they were going to go on a cruise. And so they opened up the hold and put a huge tarp in that area and filled it with water, and the kids had a swimming pool, which they used all the time while we were on that trip. Well, we stopped when we would stop. When the ship would pull into harbor, they were there for a while, and so we'd always have a nice long time, maybe a whole day, to enjoy and do some sightseeing and so forth. We stopped, I think, in Brisbane, and then the next stop was in Manila. Manila was really crazy. The traffic was unbelievably uncontrolled, but the thing that we found was that we went to a shop, and they made us clothes. We had things made, and we said, we're not going to be here long enough. Oh yes, we were going to be there long enough. And so we had a number of things made, and they were ready for us before the ship left. And that was wonderful, because we had been in Tonga where clothes just wore out. We didn't have good washing, weren't able to take care of them very well. So we had this chance to get some new clothes. After we left Manila, we crossed the China Sea, which is a really rough ride, and ended up in Hong Kong. And we were in Hong Kong. Well, that was where the ship docked, and so we had as much time as we scheduled for Hong Kong. So we did some sightseeing, and it was lots of fun to be in Hong Kong. And we went to the LDS mission home, and while we were there, we met the mission president, and he found out we were heading for Taiwan. So he said, "I've got some things I want to send to the elders over there. Would you carry some things over for me?" And sure, that was wonderful, because he told us that he would have the missionaries pick us up at the airport and take us wherever we were going. Well, when we got to the airport in Taiwan, sure enough, there were the elders with a nice big van, and we gave them the things that the mission president had sent over, and they got in their van, and they took us around and showed us some fun things, and then they went down a street and they stopped, and they said, "You can get out here." Well, we didn't have any idea what was going on, but they said, "Just go down that sidewalk and go in, and we'll pick you up in an hour," or whatever. And so, not knowing what was happening, we went down where they told us to go, and we went in, and it was on the U.S. military base, and it was a cafeteria. Well, we hadn't seen American food for a couple of years, and here were hamburgers and French fries and chili and all sorts of things that we just hadn't seen for a long, long time. Oh, the kids enjoyed that. We were, Allison was maybe 10 or 11, and the other girls that were with us, they were maybe 12 and 14 or 15, somewhere in there. Anyway, they were so happy. It was just so fun to have that chance. So we enjoyed Taiwan as well. One of the things I didn't mention was that when we were in Hong Kong, I had been corresponding with this travel agency in Hong Kong, and they were just anxious to see what kind of people were going to come from Tonga. And so when we went in, and they were surprised that we were just normal Americans. So we managed to get the rest of our trip, made sure that we knew everything that was going to happen for the rest of the trip, and that everything was set up. And that was kind of a fun thing. So from Taiwan, we went to Japan, and at this point, it was Christmas. And so we were in a hotel in Tokyo on Christmas Eve, and Japan is not a Christian nation, and so life was just going on as usual. And the kids really wanted to have some kind of a Christmas. So Allison found a candle about 10 inches high that was in the shape of a Christmas tree. And so we had our Christmas Eve with our Christmas tree in a hotel in Japan. Allison's birthday is a couple of days after Christmas, and so sometime in that time, we got her a kimono so that she had something to dress up in to show that she had been in Japan. And so our Christmas Eve, we sang hymns and read scriptures, and it was quite lovely. We enjoyed that a whole lot. But then on Christmas Day, we got up and went on a tour. It was just like any other day, and we spent a bit of time in Japan and enjoyed it a whole lot. One of the things that happened that I forgot, we as I said, Allison's birthday was right after Christmas, and we one of the tours took us up on the side of Mount Fuji, and there was a little shop there, and I found this fun toy that was a wire with a monkey on it, and you put the monkey at the top, and it slid down the wire, and it was lots of fun to play with. So I found this, but I didn't want Allison to see that I had it, so I gave it to our friend that we were with, and so that we could get it and she wouldn't know. Well, when we got back on the bus and we're halfway down the mountain, Doré pulled it out of her bag and gave it back to me. And when we talked, we realized that nobody had paid for it. So there we were with this toy that we had gotten and hadn't, and in the trying to keep it secret from Allison, nobody had paid for it. We really felt bad about that, but there was nothing at that point that we could do about it. So when we left Japan, we went to Singapore, and Singapore is really, really close to the equator, and it was hot. In fact, it was so hot that when we were walking, out trying to see things, by the time we knew our feet hurt, by the time we got back, we found out that the sidewalks had been so hot, and we had spent too much time walking on those hot sidewalks. We had blistered, really, really blistered and burned the bottoms of our feet. And so we had a hard time after that doing much in the way of sightseeing if we had to walk. We tried to find some shoes that would protect our feet, and really didn't have any success in finding anything. And so while we enjoyed Singapore, we had bad feet. We had burned our feet. The other thing that happened in Singapore was that we went to Singapore branch. I don't know, it was an English-speaking branch, so we felt really much at home there. When the meeting was over, everybody went out, and there was a bus outside. We went out and got on the bus, and they took us to the beach. And what they were doing was somebody was being baptized in the ocean, and they just took the whole branch in a bus. They had gotten a bus and took a whole branch out to share the joy of that baptism. And I still remember what a wonderful experience that was in Singapore. From Singapore, we flew to Bangkok, and we were staying in kind of British-type hotels because our travel agent had been in Hong Kong, their typical people were more British than American. And so we stayed in a hotel there that was nice and comfortable, but not posh, just nice and interesting. One of the things that we wanted, here we were in Thailand, where we love Thai food, but one of the things that Allison wanted was some Chinese food. And so we asked about where we could get some Chinese food, and they sent us to this interesting place. It was not like any restaurant we had ever been to. It was sort of an open building, and people went in and sat at tables, and there weren't any waiters or anything. People would come in who had baskets of food, and they would come and show you what they had, and you picked out what you want, and then somebody else would come, and you just sort of waited for people who were selling well. We couldn't understand the language, and we didn't know what was going on, and Allison got upset and began to cry because she was kind of frightened by the whole thing. Well, somebody saw what was happening, and they came, and they knew a little bit of English, so they helped us, and we ended up having a wonderful, wonderful Chinese meal in Bangkok. We also had lots of good Thai food while we were there, and we had a chance to visit and do a lot of sightseeing. We really enjoyed our time in Bangkok. When we went to fly out of there, somebody said to us, "Now be careful when you get to New Delhi. There's going to be a man who will approach you and want to take you in his taxi. You don't want to go with him." Okay, didn't quite know what that meant, but when we got there, in fact, a man approached us and wanted to take us in his taxi, and we didn't have any real arrangements made to get to our hotel. Our hotel was not New Delhi, but it was in Old Delhi, again made by this British type hotel. So we didn't want to go with him. We had been warned, so we got on a bus, and the bus took us around past all the American hotels in New Delhi, and then it just stopped in the middle of nowhere. It said that was the end of the line, and there we were, not knowing what to do because we were caught. And so this same man had followed the bus, and he got on the bus and he said, "Come with me in my taxi." And so he did, and he took us to, he had an arrangement took us to this hotel that was downright scary to us. And we said no, we didn't want to go there. And he finally took us to the YWCA, and we stayed there that night. One of the things that we were doing when we went to New Delhi was we knew that there was an American family there, an American LDS family there, and we wanted to find them because we had been told by somebody, maybe it was the mission president in Hong Kong, I don't know, that we should find them because there weren't very many LDS people there, and we'd enjoy it, and they would enjoy having somebody visit with them. So we tried to find them. Well, what happened was that they had just left within a week or so, and another family had come to take their place, but nobody knew them. The foreign English-speaking people all knew each other in New Delhi, and they all went to an English-speaking church, and so we went to that church to see if we could find anybody that knew this LDS family that had just moved in. Well, we finally found them, and it was great. They were so happy to talk to somebody else that was in the church. They had only been there, like I say, for a few weeks, and they just wanted to talk to somebody else who was LDS. And so we spent a couple of days visiting with them and had a wonderful time. I felt a little frustrated because I felt like I wasn't the best person in the world to give her any help and advice about anything, but we really enjoyed having that time with an LDS family there in New Delhi. I forgot one of the things that I really wanted to mention was that when we were in Bangkok, one day everybody was crowded around the television in the lobby. I mean, really a big crowd. Well, what it was happening was it was when the U.S. landed on the moon, and everybody was watching. This was happening all over people were watching all over the world, and so we had a chance to watch the moon landing while we were in Bangkok. Amazing things happened. While we were in India, we got to see things like the Taj Mahal. It was an amazing trip for us. From New Delhi, we flew into Moscow, and this was during the Cold War, and it was pretty amazing just how controlling the government was there. And of course, we couldn't read any of the signs because they were not only not on our language, but their alphabet, of course, is a whole different thing. So before you did anything, you had to, in the hotel, in the lobby, everybody lined up to talk to somebody who could make arrangements for you. So we got in line to make arrangements for a tour, an English language tour, and the couple, the people in front of us, he was a doctor, and he had spent months making arrangements and getting all the approvals he needed to go and spend some time, visit a particular hospital in Moscow that he was interested in, and probably had arrangements with some doctor there. But when he got up to the front of the line, they just said, no, you can't do that. And he said, but I have all the approvals. And they said, no, you can't do that. I'm sorry. And so they simply canceled everything that he had spent months trying to do. We toured. They had a good tour, good tours with people who spoke English exceptionally well. And then we could walk around Red Square and to different places. One time I got lost and I went into a building and had found an office with probably 200 people in one desks, and I didn't know what to do, and so I just stood in the corner and called out, "Does anybody here speak English?" Nobody responded, but then after a little bit, somebody came to me, and I told them that we had been walking and we had lost our way, and they gave us directions on how to get out of there. But they were a little hesitant about talking to us. Another thing that happened, I think they wouldn't take. We had changed, as we did every place. When we got there, we changed our money and got rubles, got Russian money, and so we expected to be able to use that in different places. Well, we were in one place, and we had been so thirsty because we couldn't find just good water to drink. And we came to this place, and it was an orange juice bar, and they had fresh orange juice, and we just, we're so excited about the fact that there was, and so we bought some orange juice. It came in one big glass, and so Allison drank half of it while I tried to pay her. All I had was rubles. She said no. She had to have American money. She had to have dollars. Well, I didn't have any dollars with me. We hadn't been dealing with dollars for a long time. And she would not take the rubles, and we didn't have any dollars. And so there we had the orange juice, which was very, very expensive, and we couldn't pay her for it. I was really fearful because of the things that we had felt while we were there, and I thought, if this had happened, it might be really bad for her. She might be disciplined very, very harshly. I went back the next day, and having gotten some had some foreign money, some money that wasn't rubles, and tried to explain to them what had happened and pay for it, and they didn't understand. And so felt really bad about that, because I was afraid that the person who had given us the orange juice would be in real trouble. It really was an oppressive atmosphere when we were there during the Cold War. I remember there was one man in the hotel where we were staying, and we had gotten ready and gone out into the hallway, and he was just literally whooping it up, going up and down the halls, and he was obviously an American, and so we talked to him, and he said, "I've been here for 3 weeks, and I get to go home." He said, "It's been terrible." And so things were pretty controlled at that point when we were in Russia. You couldn't go where you wanted to go. You only could go when you had made arrangements with the government people who were there in the hotel. From Moscow, we went to Spain and spent a couple of days in Spain and enjoyed. We had got a little boat and paddled on a little lake. We did as many things as we could that would be fun and interesting for a 10-year-old girl. Allison was like 10 or 11 at that point. And so, and we went to have dinner at like 6 o'clock in the evening and found out that the dinner hour was more like 10 o'clock. But we managed to find a place where we could get some dinner, but it was interesting to see how different societies functioned. And from there we went to Copenhagen, to Denmark. One of the things that happened there is we rented a car, and we had a reservation in a hotel. We drove to the hotel. Denmark at that point had just, within weeks or days, I don't know, had just changed from driving on the left side of the road as they did in England to driving on the right side as we do. And we had come from New Zealand, and so we drove to the hotel, everything was fine, took our things into the hotel, and then went back out and got in the car and headed down the street, came to a traffic light, and when the light turned green, I went through the light to turn right and found myself nose to nose with another car because I was still thinking driving on the left side, and when I turned and looked, there was another car. The people in that car were sitting there laughing like crazy because they had all just been going through the same kind of a problem. They were all trying to adjust to the changes that came and their habits of driving on the left and now having to change and drive on the right. So that was kind of fun. While we were there, we visited Tivoli because that was something that Allison would enjoy, and so she was thrilled with the chance to play and have a good time at Tivoli. We also took a ferry over to Sweden and drove up along the coast and just stopped in little towns. It seemed like every little town had a wonderful sculpture of some sort in it in their town square, and we had a beautiful day and went back to Copenhagen, and from there we flew to England, and we rented a camper. They called it a dormobile, and it was like a van that was made as a camper, and we wandered around in that. We wanted to go and spend some time in Wales, but we had such a good time every place we went that we didn't spend much time in Wales. We just enjoyed stopping everywhere and seeing all kinds of things. And we didn't spend a lot of time in England at that point. And then from there we went back to Ohio. We visited our family in Ohio, and then headed back to the South Pacific because we had been assigned to the Church College of New Zealand in Temple View, which is right outside of Hamilton. When we got there, Temple View is an LDS community that was built around the Church College of New Zealand. So we got settled in, and then went to see what the school was like. Well, the school was quite a nice school, and there was along the road there was a huge rose garden that just was all along the road in front of the school. I went to the library building and to meet my staff. Well, they were two wonderful women who had been there for years and had worked in that library and knew it really, really well. And they had to put up with every 2 to 5 years having some new person come in to be in charge and try and tell them what to do. And they were named Val Jones and Nolene Thompson. Well, I think they had just about had enough of having all these people come in who were in charge of the library, and I didn't know what to expect. Just that it was my assignment to run that library, to be the head person in that library. So in I went, and everything seemed just fine, except that few teachers kept coming in and it turned out that they were sort of coming in to watch the fireworks. Well, pretty soon, the man who was in charge of the school and the housing and everything pretty much in Temple View, Alton Wade, came down and he said, well, I wanted to make sure everything was all right. He said, I thought you ought to know that Val came in and told me that if I ever hired a woman to run this library, she was leaving. Well, Val had seemed friendly and everything seemed all right, but apparently everybody knew that she had said if they ever hired a woman, and so they were curious about what was going to happen. Well, as it turned out, we got along just fine. In fact, Val became one of my dearest friends, and both women knew the library and helped me get adjusted and get settled into the library. And so it was an interesting time, and I loved my time in New Zealand. After having been in Tonga, it was sort of like going home again. although there were a lot of things that were quite different, and a lot of words that they used in a different way than we did, but you learned, and it was a fun thing to do. As I said, Temple View was an LDS community, and the faculty of the church college was heavily American, and the church, well, what was happening there was that the church had a full program of all kinds of activities, which in foreign countries was not really typical. People, and so everybody that was, all the Americans that were there were doing, not only working in the school, but were also doing church work. It was sort of 24/7 that we were supposed to be examples and teaching what the church programs were really supposed to be like. So it was a challenge. The school was a boarding school, and so there were the people that lived in Temple View. There were the people everybody had probably both ward and stake assignments. Everybody worked hard at everything that they did. I don't really remember what my assignment was at the time, but I remember we would go out on stake assignments, and one of the really fun things was from the window in the library, I could look down the island and I could see this beautiful mountain peak, Mount Ruapehu, and it had a really superb hotel on it. And so when we would need to go down that direction, we would arrange to stay at the hotel in Mount Ruapehu. Oh, how beautiful! we felt like we were in heaven to have that opportunity. Well. When we'd go out, we'd find little tiny branches, and we'd go and we'd stop to visit them on Sundays. And sometimes we'd find branches, and we'd get there and we couldn't find anybody, and we would call the branch president, and the branch president would say, "Oh, nobody could come today, so we just canceled the meetings," or things like that. So it was challenging to try to build the church in that area, and everybody took it quite seriously. One time, we had an assignment, and Val, who worked with me, also, we both had assignments in Rotorua, and so we headed out in my car, my little car, and I really hadn't planned well enough. We got up in the mountainous area, and we got to a point where we were not quite to the top, and I ran out of gas. Oh boy, we were out in the middle of nowhere. And so we got out, and we were just almost to the crest of the hill. And so we got out, and we decided what we'd do is we would coast just as far as we possibly could and then hope that somebody found us. So we pushed the car just so it would start down the hill. Well, it really was the crest, because we started down and we coasted for miles, down and down and down, until we were really just a few miles out of Rotorua, and we finally came to a stop. And we looked over, and there was some kind of, I don't know exactly what it was, but inside this little compound we could see a gas pump. And we thought, I guess we were on doing the work of the Lord, because He had made sure that we made it to a place where we could manage, where we could get gas. And we went over, and there was somebody there, and and they gave us enough gas so that we could get into town and get to our meetings and do the things that we were assigned to do, and then get gas to get back to Temple View. The church college was a blessing, a great blessing to us, but it also was a great blessing to New Zealand and to Australia. The church used it as a place of training. They sent people there who had strong testimonies and would work hard and teach the students what they needed to know to go back to their homes and be strong leaders in the church. Not only in New Zealand, but a lot of the graduates of the church college went to Australia and became early leaders in the church in Australia. And so the Church College of New Zealand was a wonderful influence for the church in New Zealand. And when it was, I guess it was no longer needed, because the time finally came a few years ago when they decided to close the church college, and the buildings have actually been demolished except for the library building. And the library building has been turned into a museum of the church history in New Zealand. So it was a great blessing to have an opportunity to be there during that time and to see the church being strengthened and built so far away from the United States. I've been thinking about all of this and thinking about how my life has been guided and directed, all of it. I was given goodly parents who taught me righteous ways. I've had friends who were good friends who didn't take me away from that, and the Lord has just kind of pushed me in the way I should go all along. For example, I don't know why I would have gone to Muskingum College, but that's where I met my husband, who was also prepared to accept the gospel when we found it. We were guided to go to Ohio State, where absolutely all of the new friends that we made, that we enjoyed, and wanted to spend time with were members of a tiny, tiny little branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Columbus at that time. And they taught us the gospel, and when we were prepared, we were able to be baptized and had an opportunity to go to the temple and have a child before my husband Tom was taken from this life. After that time, everything has been, every place I've gone has been apparently because there was a reason that the Lord wanted me to do that. I've talked about some of those, and I loved the time that we were in the South Pacific, and I would have stayed in New Zealand for a longer time, but apparently it was time for us to leave, and so we came back to the United States, and on the way we had a chance to go through the Panama Canal, which was interesting, and we came in through the port of New York in a ship past the Statue of Liberty. It's hard to explain. I loved being in the South Pacific and in New Zealand and Tonga, but coming back past the Statue of Liberty, after years of being away, affected me in ways that really surprised me. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Then I was planning to go and work on a doctorate in library science at the Florida State University, but that apparently was not the right thing, and things happened that we found ourselves in Utah working on a degree at BYU. When I'd finished the classwork for that degree and took the exams toward the degree, I went to Western Washington to teach for a summer. I had been trying so hard to find a job so that I wouldn't have to worry about it by the end of the summer, and yet things just weren't working out. I had had offers and it just, none of them were right. And finally, Western Kentucky offered me a position, and I just had come to the point where I felt like I had to make a decision, and I told them, finally said, okay. And the very next day, I received a letter from BYU telling me that there was an opening in the School of Library and Information Sciences there, and I had to back out of my commitment to Western Kentucky so that I could go to accept what BYU was offering. If I had listened more carefully to what the Lord was trying to tell me, I wouldn't have ended up in that. I would have been open and able to accept BYU without having any problems. But it was only about a week before school started that I got this strange letter from one of the faculty members in the library school saying, I can't offer you the position, but it's here, why don't you come? Well, it worked out, and I ended up where the Lord wanted me at BYU. Actually, during that time, I had a voice say to me, there will be something here, but I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't know what here was. But it turned out to be BYU, and I was happy to have an opportunity to accept that position. While I was at BYU teaching in the library school, my area was school libraries and anything to do with library services to children. After I had been there a while, because I really didn't have any experience in public libraries, I took a semester and went to Tulsa, where I spent a few months with the Tulsa Public Library. After a few years, the person who taught the cataloging classes in the library school decided to do something else, and so we looked for a cataloging teacher and could not find one. And I had taught a few little things about cataloging for school libraries, but I had not really been a cataloger, and it became apparent that somebody was going to have to take over that, and so I was given the assignment to become the cataloging teacher. So I had applied for another semester off to go, and I thought I'd take a semester and go on a 6-month mission. But when all of this came up, instead of going on a mission, I spent that semester at the Utah State Library doing some cataloging. I had never had anything to do with Library of Congress cataloging, and I was going to have to teach a class. So I learned what I could in the few months that I had that semester that I had, and then for summer school, we invited Margaret Maxwell, who was one of the premier cataloging experts in the United States, to come and teach the summer school class. Well, she was LDS, and she was teaching at the University of Arizona, and she graciously accepted the chance to come. And so I sat through her classes and learned everything I could. And when she left at the end of the summer, she gave me all of her material, so that I had been exposed to an excellent cataloging class, and I had all the materials that she had. So really quickly, I took those materials and worked them up into a class that included her materials in my class. I was so grateful. The Lord had given me an opportunity to prepare for this, but as usual, that's exactly what He did. In addition to teaching classes, I was also the graduate coordinator for the library school and the person who took care of admissions and evaluating our applications and selecting those students who would be admitted to the school. in the 1990s, the BYU decided that they would close the library school. When the library school closed, most of us were very close to retirement, and I think that was a big thing in closing the school. And so, but not quite. I wasn't quite there, so I chose to move into the BYU Family History Library, where I had a chance to teach a class for the volunteers who came in to work in that library, people who were volunteering to help others with their family history. So I had this wonderful chance to prepare a class which taught me all the things I needed to know, not all, but taught me so many things I needed to know about doing my own family history. I'd been working on it for a long time, but still the opportunity to teach others really teaches you a lot. So I had that opportunity, and I learned many things about doing my own family history. After 2 or 3 years there, I retired from BYU. After I retired from BYU, I again decided it was time to go on a mission. So I went to the bishop and I got all the material to fill out the application, and I took it home and I filled out the application. I got to the end of the last page, and as I was almost ready to sign my name, the Lord said, "You'll do this in my time, not yours." So I put down my pen and I took the application back to the bishop and said, "I have to do this in the Lord's time, not in my time." And so I didn't go on a mission at that point. And some time later, I don't remember exactly how long it was, my bishop called me into his office. I think maybe it was a new bishop, I'm not sure. And he said, "Well, I was going to call you to be a temple worker, but then I decided that you should go on a mission." And so I filled out another application, and I was called to go to Australia to a mission in Australia. Well, it was interesting that I was called to Australia to a mission, because going on a mission had really worried my daughter. She was not really very well, and she had convinced herself that since I was going on a mission, they were going to call me to go to work in Salt Lake at the Family History Library. But instead, I got this call to Australia, which was she knew where Australia was. She knew how far away it was because we'd been in New Zealand. And so she had to adjust to that. She had to adjust to the fact that I was not going to be in Salt Lake, not going to be where she could run or call or find me when she had something she needed. Well, in fact, the Australia thing didn't work. That wasn't really where the Lord wanted me to go. It was just a place that Allison knew where it was and that I was going to be far, far away. After waiting to work things out to go to Australia and not having it work out, I finally went to the church office building and talked to them, and again, another, they looked to see where they could send me, since the Australia thing just simply wasn't working. And they came up with the England, London, South Mission, and they said, this is really strange. There's the mission president has asked for a sister missionary, and ordinarily it takes us months to get all the work done, the visa work and all of the transportation and everything taken care of. But there's a slot open and we can send you out next week. Again, the Lord had things set up the way He wanted them, and I went to England and was in the England, London, South Mission. I started there in Bournemouth. The first Sunday I was there, a woman walked in the chapel and said she was looking, she was trying, she wanted to know more about the church. She had met somebody online that had been helping her through some problems, and they were members. The person, that man, was a member of the church, and she wanted to know more about what it was that made him be able to help her so much. And so immediately we had this person to work with. After we had taught her for a few weeks, she went to Australia, and eventually she joined the church in Australia. So that was a great experience. Most of my mission, I was in London, and I loved being in London. It was a wonderful experience, and there were many people that we had a chance to meet and work with. There were many experiences that were inspiring and testimony building. And most of the time, my companion was Linda Golson, and she was a wonderful companion. We still keep in touch, and I really appreciated her help for me, and I hope I was of some help to her as well during that time. But we worked well together. When I came home from my mission, then the bishop did call me to be a temple worker, and so I spent a few years as a temple worker in the Mount Temple. Both of these experiences, I learned a great deal. They were very wonderful spiritual experiences that taught me a lot about the gospel and the spirit that we live by. Finally, I came to the point where I couldn't hear enough, and whenever people would talk to me, I would have to say to them, would you speak up? Would you say that a little louder? Well, that's not the right way. That's not the way things work in the temple. And so I finally decided that I had reached the end of the time that I could be of service in the temple, and asked to be released from that calling. Well, I had learned a lot about doing my family history, and had been working on it, and now I was able to really spend my time working on my family history and pulling that together. When I came home from my mission, I had thought that I would spend a little bit of time catching up on what was available online, and then I would get busy going back to digging in courthouses and libraries and places like that. Well, what was online just kept growing and growing and growing, and all these years later, I still haven't been able to catch up with what's available online, and I'm still working on that and still learning and having a wonderful time trying to find my ancestors and their families and descendants. I had a calling, of course, like everybody else, as a visiting teacher, and that calling included my companion who had Parkinson's and really couldn't get out and do things. So we would all gather at her home at least once a month and have a wonderful time talking and learning about the gospel, and this was a great thing. We enjoyed that until I got too sick for a little while to manage planning those times together, and so that kind of fell apart. And one of the sisters that we taught had been having memory problems, and so that wonderful experience kind of came to an end. Then one day, the Sunday school president took me by the arm and took me where we could talk, and he said, I'd like to call you to be the president of the gospel doctrine class. Oh, what in the world did that mean? Well, what it really meant was that he wanted somebody to call the class to order and to welcome everybody there and make sure we had a teacher, make sure that the teacher was there. The teachers always were there. We have had wonderful gospel doctrine teachers, but I was amazed because, as usual, the Lord was right there understanding what I needed, because I had decided the day before that I was no longer going to go to the Sunday school class. My hearing was really bad, and I couldn't tell what was going on. I couldn't understand what people were saying when they made comments, and I often couldn't understand what the teacher was saying, depending on who was teaching the class. And so I had made the decision that I just was not going to go to Sunday school class anymore. And the very next day, he pulled me in and assigned me to this little calling that was really not much of a calling, but told me that the Lord was aware of what I was thinking and what I was doing, as he always had been. And so I became the president of the gospel doctrine class, and ever since then I have been greeting everybody to the gospel doctrine class on Sunday mornings, and having all the visitors introduce themselves, and going to Sunday school class. In the meantime, I got new hearing aids, and I am now able to hear what the teacher is saying and the comments that people are making. Altogether, there's no question in my mind as I look back on this that every step of the way, my life has been guided, and I've made decisions and the Lord has blocked the way when they were not right. I have made decisions and He has enabled me when they were right. And it has been an amazing thing to look back and to see how this has happened throughout my entire life. And I am so grateful for good parents that taught me the things I needed to know so that I could accept the gospel when it came, and that I could learn to hear the Spirit, and I could understand that I was being guided and directed in everything that's happened. And so I leave this all with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I've been thinking about how women have been perceived throughout my life. Back before World War II, women were expected to get married and have children and stay at home and take care of their children and make life wonderful for their husbands. And children at that point were free to roam and play outside, and they were unaware if there were really many problems going on unless they were hungry. I remember my aunt telling me, she's saying, "Oh, I guess we were really, really poor when I was little, but we didn't know it. We were just enjoying life." And so there were roles that were established, and society expected women to do that. I think of the example that I know of, that when I was in elementary school, the women who were teachers were missed this and missed that. And as I went into the fourth grade, woman that was teaching in the fourth grade retired, and they had to find a new teacher. And a woman had moved into town whose husband had died. She had 3 children, and she had come to our town because her sister lived there and she could come and live with her. She needed to work, but she was a teacher, and the school board had a policy that they would not hire a married woman with children. Married women with children were supposed to be at home taking care of the children. Well, my dad was the principal of the school, and he went to the school board and he fought for her because she needed an income. And they finally gave in, but the policy was that married women with children would not be hired. They would stay home and take care of their children. Then when World War II came along, there weren't enough teachers. All the men had gone off to join the military. And so opportunities came, and when I was about 12, I guess, my mother started teaching again. The women at that point were finding opportunities to get out of the home and work part-time or work full-time, but there was, especially the women that I knew, had opportunities either as teachers or nurses or secretaries, which hadn't been available to them before. And so my mother started teaching at that point during World War II, and she taught from that time until she retired. She had a chance to be more independent, and she really felt good about this opportunity. When my husband died, I was completely unaware. I had just lived a happy life and had the things that I needed. But when he died, I found out that I became a nobody. I couldn't get credit. I couldn't do a lot of things because everything depended on who your husband was and how much he made and how important he was. This was a real blow to me. And really made me look at things in a different way. The thing that I had, though, were friends. When we went to Long Island, we had just learned about the gospel and had not yet been baptized into the church, but we loved it, and so we went to church as soon as we got moved into our little house. Well, the first time we went to church, we were greeted by this smiling, friendly person. His name was Roger Zerenberg, and he and his wife, Juanita, just took us and made us part of their family. They were very special people in our lives, and made the transition for us into the church really very easy. They were there for us all the time. And when I needed a doctor, when I got pregnant, Nita took me to her doctor at Presbyterian Hospital in New York, and he was a wonderful doctor, and she went with me and stayed with me through the whole thing. And when the time came that they came to tell me about what had happened, the accident that had happened. They were the ones that were able to come and tell me about what had happened to Tom. So they were just really, really special people in my life, and supported. And for years, we kept in touch. Another family that was special were Dale and Phyllis McDonald. Phyllis was a people person, and she was just such a delight and so full of love for everybody. Her husband Dale was a lawyer, and so he was always trying to help people, but was not the warm and kind of a person that Phyllis was. Everybody loved Phyllis. But when I was in need, when Tom died, Dale was the one that came and went through everything in my house and took care of absolutely everything that needed to be taken care of. He applied for Social Security for me and for Allison. He took care of insurance problems. He took care of, even to the point of selling our house when I left. And he did this. We were only there a few months at this after this accident and after Allison was born. But he took care of things for me for not just days, but months and years when I was gone in far distant places. He took care of legal things and just lots of things that needed to be done, and so these, and then Phyllis, after her husband died, after Dale died, she came to Utah County, and we renewed our friendship, and we were very close friends who went to lunch and took classes together and did all kinds of things in these last few years. She was such a wonderful example to me, and these have been people that have just been great blessings in my life. Also, on Long Island, Bill and Millie Guest. Bill was our bishop, and when the time came that all of the relatives and friends had gone away, they came and packed me up and simply took me to their house and had me live with them for a few weeks while I was getting things sorted out, and before I left Long Island. The other family that I think of at this particular time, was Rex and Rita Spendlove. They had been at Ohio State and had taught us the gospel, which has been the greatest blessing in our lives. Well, when he finished his degree at Ohio State, we had gone to Long Island, and they moved to Connecticut. So we still had contact with them and would see them occasionally. And at this point where I needed support and help, they came down from Connecticut to commiserate with me and to cry with me and to help me pack up some things. And then since I've been in Utah, they have been in Logan, and so I have had contact with them again throughout all my life, and they have been staunch friends and wonderful support, and I'm really grateful for them.